Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 10th December 2025 and today we are having some important topics from different newspapers. So one by one we'll be discussing all these topics in detailed and in-depth manner. And the first topic with which we're going to start this session is about the removal procedure of the Judge of High Court. Now, in fact, the removal procedure of Judge of Supreme Court and High Court is very important from the exam point of view. However, there is an article which has been given in the Hindu newspaper about the removal motion for the impeachment of a High Court judge, whose name is Justice G.R. Swaminathan. And in fact, India Bloc MPs have also submitted this motion to the Speaker Om Birla. Now let's understand about this procedure in detailed and in-depth manner. Now in fact, if you look at the proposal to remove a judge of the Supreme Court or a High Court, a proposal can be introduced in either house of the Parliament. It can be introduced in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha to remove a judge of the Supreme Court or a High Court. Now we'll be understanding how this impeachment process will move on and what exactly is the procedure for the impeachment of a judge. Now let's understand the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Courts in India. However, now in fact, independence of the judiciary is part of the basic structure doctrine. Now in fact, we all knew that in Keshavananda Bharati judgment, the Supreme Court has come up with the basic structure doctrine. Now basic structure doctrine consisting of all essential and important features of the Indian Constitution. So therefore, since judicial independence is a basic structure of the Indian Constitution, and in fact the removal of the judges is also a very difficult and a tightly regulated process. Now in fact, this difficult and a tightly regulated process has been ensured to ensure that judges are insulated from the political pressure, and judges are also not removed very easily by the Parliament. Now let's understand the constitutional basis for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. Now in fact, for the removal of the Supreme Court judges, Article 124 Clause 4. Article 124 Clause 4. It says that a judge of the Supreme Court can be removed only on the grounds of proved misbehavior and incapacity. Now in fact, the judges of the High Courts can also be removed only on the grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity. Now in fact, Article 124 Clause 5 says that Parliament is given the power to regulate the procedure for the removal of the judges of the Supreme Court. Right? So by this, what we have understood that proved misbehavior or incapacity are the grounds for the removal of the judges of the Supreme Court. And apart from that, Article 124 Clause 5 says Parliament may regulate the procedure for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court. However, which constitutional provision deals with the removal of the judges of the High Court, which is Article 217. Article 217 Clause 1 and Subclause B, it deals with the removal of judges of the Supreme Court. Now in fact, this constitutional provision says that the judges of the High Courts are also removed on the same grounds in the same manner as the judge of the Supreme Court. So therefore, the judges removal process of the High Courts and Supreme Court is almost similar and identical as well. Now in this context, you have to understand the grounds for the removal of the judges and the constitutional provisions which governs the removal of the judge of the Supreme Court and High Courts. Next, so what are the grounds for the removal of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court? Now the first ground is proved misbehavior and second ground is incapacity. And in fact, these are two grounds which are mentioned in the Indian Constitution. However, if we talk about the misbehavior, they include corruption, bias, abuse of the judicial office, moral turpitude, and even political partisanship. So all these things covered under the proved misbehavior of the judges. However, if we talk about the incapacity as a ground for the removal of the High Court judges, it includes physical and mental inability to discharge their duties effectively. However, let's understand, any judge of the High Court is removed before through this process on the grounds of proved misbehavior and incapacity. Justice Soumitra Sen, so a Kolkata High Court judge. So in fact, he was impeached by Rajya Sabha in the year 2011. However, for the financial irregularities which comes under the proved misbehavior. However, Justice Soumitra Sen resigned before Lok Sabha voted. So therefore, he was not removed through the procedure. Rather, once he was impeached by Rajya Sabha in the year 2011, after that he resigned as a judge of the High Court. And here we're talking about the procedure for the removal of judge of a High Court. So here a detailed procedure has been given, but going ahead into the lecture, we'll be understanding the detailed procedure for the removal of the judge of the High Court. Now let's understand how the initiation of the removal process will start, or it will be initiated. Now firstly, notice will be submitted by the MPs to either Speaker of the Lok Sabha or the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, a motion for the removal can be initiated in either house. That means it can be initiated in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. However, for that to happen, Lok Sabha requires a signature of at least 100 MPs in Lok Sabha, and in Rajya Sabha it requires the signature of at least 50 MPs. For example, in the current case, to remove Justice Swaminathan, 107 Lok Sabha MPs of India bloc submitted a letter to initiate impeachment proceedings against G.R. Swaminathan, who is a judge of the Madras High Court. So in this case, 107 Lok Sabha MPs, which is more than 100 MPs, have already submitted this notice for the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. However, it is up to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha either to accept or reject this motion. Now in this context, let's understand the role of Speaker or Chairman in this aspect. Now in fact, the Speaker of Lok Sabha or Chairman of Rajya Sabha, they may either accept or reject the motion. Now in fact, this stage is considered as a discretionary power of the presiding officer of the respective house, and it is not covered under the judicial review. Now in this context, the Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla has stated that he will look into the motion against Justice Swaminathan. So therefore, this actually reflects the admission stage. Now what if he accepts this motion? However, if he rejects this motion, then this motion will end here. However, if he accepts this motion against Justice Swaminathan, what will happen next? Let's understand this as well. Now, if Speaker Om Birla accepts this motion from the India bloc MPs, because already 107 MPs from the India bloc have signed and submitted this motion to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Now Lok Sabha Speaker will constitute an inquiry committee. Now in fact, if this motion is accepted or admitted by the Speaker of Lok Sabha, the Lok Sabha Speaker forms a 3-member inquiry committee, and in fact it has been provided under the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Now, the composition of a 3-member inquiry committee consisting of a Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and an eminent jurist. So in fact, this is a 3-member committee that will be constituted by the presiding officer of the respective house where this motion is adopted. Now what functions this 3-member inquiry committee will perform? This committee will function in a judiciary style way, and it also conduct a judiciary style inquiry. And apart from that, it also has the power to examine evidence, documents, witnesses, and in fact it also determine whether the charges are proved, whether the judge is really guilty or not is being found out by the 3-member inquiry committee. However, if charges are not proved, then the motion will be dropped. However, if charges are proved, then Parliament votes on the removal of the judge of the High Court. Right. Now, in this case, we imagine or we assume that this motion has been adopted and a 3-member inquiry committee has also been formed by the presiding officer of the House, and then this 3-member inquiry committee also finds out that the judge is found guilty of this charges. Now, what parliamentary procedure will be initiated in this context? Now, a parliamentary procedure will require a special majority in both houses of the parliament to remove the judge of a high court. Now, the special majority requirement. So, special majority of the total membership of the respective house, and majority of not less than 2/3 of members present and voting. This is the special majority which is required in each house, and it must be passed with the special majority in both houses to get the High Court judge removed. Now, this is the same stringent majority required for the constitutional amendments under Article 368 of the Indian Constitution. So, in order to amend the constitutional provisions, the very same special majority is required under Article 368. Now, what is the role of the President in this context? Now, if both houses of the Parliament passed this with a special majority, the motion sent to the President of India, and President orders the removal of the judge of the concerned High Court. So this is the procedure for the removal of a judge of a High Court or a Supreme Court. And in fact, these constitutional provisions and Judges Inquiry Act 1968 have provided for a detailed procedure for the removal of judges of the High Court and Supreme Court. However, Justice V. Ramaswamy in the year 1993 was the first Supreme Court judge against whom an inquiry was completed. However, the motion was failed in Lok Sabha because at that point of time, Congress abstained, demonstrating the difficulty of securing a special majority. Right? So this is how a judge of the Supreme Court or a High Court will be removed. I hope you have understood the procedure for the removal of a judge of the Supreme Court and High Court. Now let's understand a right to health, and it is a very important from the exam point of view, and this topic has been given in the Hindu newspaper as an editorial. So let's discuss and let's understand how we can chart out an agenda on the right to health. Now let's understand that a right to health means access to the universal health coverage. So this universal health coverage includes the timely health, acceptable, appropriate, affordable, accessible and good quality health care for everyone irrespective of the social status, economic status and the political status, which is known as the right to health care or universal health coverage. Now in this context, let's look at the right to health in India in a very brief way. Right. So if we talk about the right to health in India, health is a foundation of a human right, not just in India, in every part of the world. And in fact, healthcare is considered as central to human dignity and development of every human being. But right to health is not explicitly recognized in the Indian Constitution in any of these fundamental rights. So we have a list of fundamental rights which are provided under Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. But in these fundamental rights, right to health is not explicitly recognized as a fundamental right. However, so Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which says about right to life and personal liberty, has included a number of rights in it because it is a broader right in nature. Right? So right to pollution-free environment, right to marry a person of one's choice, right to privacy. So all these rights over a period of time the Supreme Court has included as part of Article 21 as a fundamental rights, part of right to life and personal liberty. In a similar way, right to health care is also become part of or integral part of the Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. However, if you look at India's healthcare landscape, healthcare architecture, So the healthcare architecture continues to suffer a struggle from inadequate public investment, lack of infrastructure, inadequate human resources such as doctors, nurses, and rising commercialization. So that means increasing the private sector participation. Increasing private sector participation will make public health care less affordable, and even the entrenched social inequalities when it comes to accessing quality, affordable health care. However, the National Convention on Health Rights, so that was convened on 2025 December, it marks an important landmark moment to reimagine healthcare as just, equitable, and universal public good. So in this context, we'll understand the landscape of healthcare in India and how we can achieve a universal health care as part of right to health. Now, if we talk about the universal health care, so it takes into account the financial protection of people, reduced poverty, increased jobs, efficient and accountable healthcare systems. It also takes into account gender equality, gender equity, and even improved health outcomes by ensuring affordable, accessible, and available healthcare to every citizen of this country. Now let's understand the public health challenges in India. Now in India, we have a set of public health challenges. Let's understand those challenges one by one. Now, in fact, India is one of the lowest spending countries on the healthcare. Now, according to some estimates, India has been spending less than 2% of its GDP on healthcare. This is the first and foremost problem that we have been facing with respect to healthcare. Now, when we have been spending very low than the required levels, then we may not be able to create the required amount of infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure. And apart from that, just 2% of union budget is allocated to the healthcare services every year, right? So just 2% of the total amount of budget is spent on the healthcare sector. And apart from that, the per capita public spending is just $25 every year. And in fact, the out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure of people has been growing at a rapid pace. It stands at around 43%. Now, all these facts have been indicating the poor state of India's healthcare, right? So therefore, there is a need to increase public investment in the healthcare sector. However, with the rise of commercialization or with the rise of private sector in India's healthcare, the problem is that the healthcare is becoming less affordable and less accessible for the people. Now, this is the time that the government should make large-scale investments, and the government must spend at least 3% of its GDP on the healthcare sector to achieve the objective of right to healthcare in a true spirit. Right. So let's understand the other issue within the healthcare system, which is privatization and even the rise of corporate healthcare. Now, first thing that we should understand is that there is a significant and a rapid rise in the commercial private hospitals across India. Now, in fact, the healthcare system is completely dominated by the private hospitals. However, the problem is that the private hospitals are not affordable to the people. So therefore, the private hospitals are also increasingly supported by domestic and foreign investment as well. Now, in recent times, increasing public-private partnership have led to the public medical colleges and district hospitals being handed over to the private operators as well. So this is a situation which is a cause of concern or a cause of worry. However, the result of increasing commercialization, increasing privatization of healthcare is unaffordable services for crores who dependent on the public facilities for the healthcare. However, the public healthcare facilities provide healthcare to the people free of cost. They play a very important role in achieving universal access to healthcare, achieving the objective of right to healthcare. However, there are actually movements against privatization in states like Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Mumbai, Madhya Pradesh, and even several tribal districts of Gujarat. So therefore, this is the time that the government should substantially increase public investment in healthcare, and government should also regulate increasing privatization of healthcare and also regulate the increasing prices to access healthcare. So let's understand access to medicines, which is also a very important domain when we talk about a universal access to healthcare or affordable healthcare. Now, in fact, medicine themselves account for up to 50% of total medical spending. However, around 80% of the medicines, they are still outside the price control, and this is a cause of worry. However, the existing problems include irrational drug combinations in the market, unethical marketing, and even high retail markups. So these are all some problems in the medicine in India. However, there are proposals for expanding public sector drug production, removing GST on essential medicines, so that will help reduce the cost of these medicines and make them more and more affordable for the people, and even strengthening the price regulation as well. However, let's understand the health workforce justice in this context. Now, if we talk about that, the COVID-19 has actually demonstrated the indispensability of the importance of doctors, nurses, ASHA workers at the grassroots level, paramedics, and even the support staff. They can actually play a very important role in achieving the objectives of universal access to healthcare and the right to health. However, many of them have been facing several problems. For example, low wages paid to the A&M and ASHA workers, and contractual employment, poor working conditions for these doctors or medical staff, and minimal social security for them. And in fact, in recent times, there are targeted attacks against the doctors as well. So therefore, ensuring fair remuneration and protections is essential for resilient health systems in a country like India. So therefore, health workforce justice is another very important dimension or component that has to be taken care adequately. However, let's understand the social determinants and equity as a component, because there are several vulnerable, marginalized, and disadvantaged sections of the society. Now, in fact, the health inequalities is a major cause of concern. If you look at those marginalized groups, they include Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims, LGBTQ plus persons, women, persons with disabilities, and children. In fact, they continue to face discrimination when it comes to accessing quality healthcare. However, the interventions must include gender justice, social inclusion, and even protection of vulnerable communities. However, the Union government has launched several programs to ensure the access to healthcare for everyone without any discrimination. For example, in order to make medicines more and more affordable, Jan Aushadhi Yojana program has been launched, National Health Mission has been launched to achieve inclusive healthcare, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, it is a health insurance program, and National Dialysis program, and Mission Indradhanush for vaccination and immunization of children. Ayushman Bharat program has been launched. National Medical Commission has been established to regulate the healthcare education in India or medical education in India, and Janani Sisu Suraksha Karikram has been launched to ensure the good health of our children and the mothers. Right? So therefore, in this context, it is very important that the government should focus on increasing the public investment, providing pollution-free environment, and also ensuring nutrition for children, pregnant women, and lactating mothers, including adolescent girls, and at the same time focus on other important aspects to achieve the universal health care and the objectives under the right to health. However, what should be the way forward? Now, in fact, it is immediate and urgent need to recognize right to health as a fundamental right, and apart from that, there is a need to strengthen public health systems which are capable of delivering universal, free, quality services to the people. And in fact, the out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure is also rising at an enormous level, and there is a need to reduce the out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure, community level planning, decentralization of health governance, and even transparent regulation of the private providers. So all these are key elements that the government must focus on to achieve the objectives of right to healthcare. However, we should not forget the role of a civil society in this context. The Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, completing 25 years in 2025, it exemplifies a sustained advocacy for a pro-people health policies across 20 plus states as well. So this could be an appropriate way forward to achieve universal health coverage in a country like India. Now let's understand another very important topic, which is about the special intensive revision exercise which has been given in the Hindu newspaper. Now this editorial is talking about a deep cleansing of India's electoral rolls. So let's understand what is the special intensive revision exercise and what is the nationwide debate about this special intensive revision exercise. Now in fact, the intensive revision of the fresh electoral rolls. Now the fresh electoral rolls are prepared from the scratch with 100% door-to-door verification conducted by the Election Commission of India. Secondly, if we talk about the summary revision, so there will be no intensive revision of electoral roll. There will be no door-to-door verification of the voters in the summary revision. However, the summary revision is just an annual process and it updates made based on claims and objections without any field verification. So this is the difference between intensive revision and summary revision. Third thing, so it is partly intensive and partly summary. Now in fact, it is a mixed approach, existing rules published in draft while officers conduct household verification as well. However, if we talk about the special revision, it is done when routine updates are deemed insufficient and can be attached to other methods as well. However, what is this special intensive revision exercise? Now in fact, this special intensive revision exercise has been carried out in the state of Bihar before its before General Assembly elections, right? So in fact, not defined in electoral rules. In fact, it is a discretionary method created by the Election Commission of India in 2025 to validate the voter citizenship. So let's understand cleansing electoral rolls in India in detailed manner. Now in fact, accurate electoral rolls. So you have got an electoral roll for elections to Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies. So therefore, there is a need to ensure accuracy in these electoral rolls. So therefore, accurate electoral rolls are foundation for a free and fair elections in India. However, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar emphasized that while introducing the Representation of the People Bill 1950, a preparation of electoral roll is a condition precedent for election. A condition which is very important to conduct a free and fair elections. So therefore, there needs to be an electoral roll. However, we all knew that India after its independence adopted universal adult franchise. Every individual who is above 18 years of age was given right to vote irrespective of social, economic and political status, and it is considered as bedrock of India's democracy. So therefore, in this context, it is very important that Constitution has given the responsibility to Election Commission of India to maintain an error-free, inclusive rules which are essential for reinforcing the public trust. Right. So why electoral roll cleansing is necessary and important? So let's understand this in this context. Right. So in fact, there are some structural challenges which are existing. So what structural challenges are existing and that necessitates electoral roll cleansing? Because in major part of India, there's a high migration and urban mobility. So that result in duplicate and outdated entries. Secondly, lack of unified civil registry. For example, in countries like Germany and Canada, so they have a unified civil registry. So that means ECI must independently verify the eligibility of the voters. Secondly, the democratic imperatives which are existing. For example, ensuring that only eligible citizens vote under Article 326 of the Indian Constitution. So therefore, preventing disenfranchisement due to inaccuracies, especially among the vulnerable groups. However, let's understand the mechanism for the revision of the electoral rolls. So firstly, we have to talk about the intensive revision exercise. Now this intensive revision exercise, summary revision exercise and special intensive revision exercise, we have already understood this. Now intensive revision, it actually rebuilds the voter list from the scratch, 100% of the voter list, door-to-door verification, and last such a major intensive revision took place in the year 2002 and 2003. Then we have to talk about the summary revision. Now in summary revision, incremental corrections, it is the dominant method in recent years. And then the special intensive revision exercise. Now the special intensive revision exercise was ordered when large scale inaccuracies arise. For example, the special intensive revision exercise in the year 2025, it has been undertaken in the state of Bihar to address the duplication and outdated entries to cleanse the electoral rolls in detailed manner. And in fact, you can also go through this special intensive revision exercise and how it has been carried out from the step by step. So let's understand the special intensive revision 2025 and its key features as well. So if we talk about the key features of special intensive revision exercise, now it has certain administrative and technological innovations. For example, a door-to-door verification of 7.5 crore entries was made. And apart from that, digitization of all supporting documents and even online availability of forms, claims and even objections as well. So you can see that there is some administrative and technological innovations which are brought in when it comes to conducting a special intensive revision exercise. Secondly, expanded documentation for eligibility to be registered as a voter. Now, in fact, the acceptable proofs as an eligibility as a voter increased from 4 in 2003 to overall 11. So therefore, this can be considered as a more liberal approach to identify a particular individual as an eligible voter. And apart from that, Aadhaar is also accepted as identity proof following Supreme Court's intervention and its suggestion. However, it has further increased the transparency because a training of 1.6 lakh booth level agents from different political parties and engagement with the various political parties for role sharing and monitoring, and even volunteers from the state legal services authorities are also assisted citizens online to ensure that the exclusions are very minimal. However, what are the outcomes of the special intensive revision exercise? The outcomes of the special intensive revision exercise is 65 lakh names removed after verification from the electoral roll in the state of Bihar. However, only 2,53,524 objections were filed against this deletion from the electoral roll, and in fact it is just a small fraction of the total entries. However, only 36,500 claims for inclusion, which is just 0.56% of the total deletion of the voters, and in fact 0 appeals against the deletions. So what it reveals, what interpretation that we can actually make from this data? So it indicates that deletions were mostly legitimate, and in fact it actually demonstrates that fears of arbitrary mass disenfranchisement further exaggerated, and there are certain concerns and criticism which is also associated with this. For example, the allegations that a fresh documents demand violate universal adult franchise, and in fact the fear of potential exclusion of the marginalized voters. They may not be able to approach the Election Commission of India and the concerned agencies to re-include their names in the electoral roll. So therefore, this is also a concern. This may lead to disenfranchisement of marginalized voters. However, the constitutional provisions gave the Election Commission of India a broader powers for superintendent's direction and control of overall poll preparation, and this is how ECI has justified its special intensive revision exercise carried out throughout India. So that's all for today, and thank you so much. Please subscribe our YouTube channel, and if you have any suggestions, please write those suggestions in the comment section. Thank you.